Hey everyone, my name is Sharon. I'm currently a tutor at the Writing Center, and today we are going to be talking about choosing the best sources for your paper. So first, we're going to talk about the importance of why you want to choose great sources for your paper. Rika, if you could go to the next slide, thank you. So the first reason why it's really important to have strong and valid sources for your paper is because it helps the reader assess the validity and credibility of your argument. So readers are more likely to understand your claim and understand why you're speaking about what you're speaking about if the sources that you use are relevant and valid to the topic at hand. This kind of goes into the second point of strengthening your claim overall. It's really important to use strong sources because it helps your claim get justified and it helps you include evidence to support your analysis of the topic at hand. Something that's also really important is that using strong sources helps you avoid plagiarism, especially for really complex subjects and topics. Sometimes we don't know all the answers, so we have to do personal research before we can write our papers. It's important to include the sources that we used where we found the information to avoid plagiarism and cite our information properly. So next up, we have some important keywords to look for. Before you even start reading your source, there are a few things that you can look for to kind of gauge and assess the validity and credibility of the source. The first thing is where you found it. So anything ending in a .edu URL or .gov for education and government tend to be a lot more credible. .org for organizations are also generally pretty credible, but you definitely want to be a little bit more careful with this one. Do a little bit of research of where the organization or what the organization is, where the information is coming from, and how biased the source is. The second thing that you can look for when judging a source's credibility is the author's credentials. So authors with education in the subject matter tend to be more credible. So if you have a PhD, MD, JD, or any sort of educational affiliation with the topic at hand, the content tends to be more qualified and credible. Lastly, it's really awesome and really helpful to look for peer-reviewed and scholarly sources. What this basically means is that another scholar or peer in the industry has reviewed this paper and has also judged it to be very credible and valid. Now you have a little bit more reputability with the source rather than something that is not peer-reviewed or scholarly. So these are all some steps that you can take before you even start reading the source in the first place. On the next slide, this is kind of what you can do once you start reading the source. Now that you've kind of deemed that it's credible and verifiable to begin with, just kind of looking at the article and looking who wrote it, now we can start looking at this content itself. So is the content accurate? Is it reliable and free of errors? If you're noticing that there are discrepancies in the source between some common knowledge information, there might be typos, things like that often make the source a little bit less accurate. Authority is also really important, making sure that the author is qualified to write about the subject matter, and also looking at objectivity. Is the source biased? Is it fact-based? Is it opinion-based? Oftentimes you want to veer towards being more fact-based because you can help build your personal argument based off of the facts provided in the source. Another thing that's really important to look at is currency. Is the source current or outdated? As information changes, especially in today's day and age, it's important to make sure that the sources that we're using are current and using the information that is most recently provided. Lastly, coverage is really important based on just what type of paper you're writing. So this is definitely up to you based on if you want a specific or broad sort of view of the article or the source that you're looking at. So make sure that if you want something more specific, that you're choosing an article or source or journal entry that kind of suits your needs, versus if you're looking for something more broad, that the source meets those needs as well. Now that we kind of know what a good source looks like, I'm going to go over a few places of where you can find these sources. So one of my favorites is the UT Dallas Library Resources. So every university has a library resource database, which has a lot of really awesome information. So if you can see at the top of the screenshot, you see the URL for where you can find this resource. And this is the homepage of our library's website. And on this page, there are a lot of really great resources. And one of my personal favorites is the research guides. So if you click on that link, you'll be taken to a page where you can see every single subject matter from actuarial science to accounting to computer science and everything in between. And you'll be able to find research guides with scholarly articles about these subject matters. So if you're kind of lost, don't know where to start with a specific topic, the research guides are a great place to be. On the next slide, we have a way for you to find databases. So there are a bunch of different databases offered by the university, and thankfully, as students, it is free of charge for us. So if we just log in with our NetID and password, we will be able to access these resources. There are many different databases, each with a very niche specialty, and there are hundreds that we have access to. The three on the right are some of my personal favorites. JSTOR has a lot of scholarly research papers and journal articles. ERIC is used for education sciences, and IEEE Explore is used for computer sciences and engineering. Those are just three of the databases offered by the university, but definitely look at this tab and see which one works best for the topic that you're writing about. All right, to close out kind of the presentation, we're kind of going to go through a practice session of looking at a topic as if this was an essay that you were writing in class and judging the validity and credibility of a few of our sources. So the topic that we're looking at today is analyze the Cold War and how it impacted American society. There are two different types of sources that you can look at, especially since this is more of a historical essay. The first is a primary source directly from the Cold War era, written from someone in that time. And the second would be a secondary source, so an interpretation or description of the era or a topic from this era. Our end goal is to provide analysis that really helps us understand the implications of the Cold War on American society. And the way that we're going to do that with the sources is by providing really concrete examples to help justify the claims that we'll make. So I know that we probably don't have time to actually look at the database right now, so I have a few screenshots on the next slide. So the first thing that I did was I Googled the Cold War. This was one of the first links that came up, and it definitely has a lot of information, but based on what we learned in the previous slides, we're going to decide whether or not the source is credible or not. So to begin with, this actually is a .org website. So again, we definitely want to be a little bit hesitant when we're looking at .org websites, whether or not they're credible or not. Looking at the website, we're not able to see an author. So that's definitely a red flag because we don't know who wrote this article. So we're not really able to assess whether or not they're qualified to be speaking on the subject matter. Based on that, as well as just all the information that's provided here and not really many places to see whether or not it's peer reviewed or scholarly, we're going to go ahead and deem this source as not credible for the topic at hand. Now, on the next slide, we have another source. This is from JSTOR, so it's already a plus because JSTOR only has peer-reviewed and scholarly sources. The first thing that we can notice is that the author is really clear to find. After doing some research on the author, we found out that he is a very popular historian and he specializes in foreign affairs. The second thing that you can see is that this is from 1967, the Foreign Affairs Journal article. So it's a primary source from the time, and it's a really, really reputable source. Based on the author's qualifications, the source being peer-reviewed, as well as the currency of the source, we can go ahead and deem this one as credible. On to our last one. This one is also from JSTOR, so again, peer-reviewed and scholarly. The two authors are both political scientists. This is more of a secondary source since it was written in 1995. Doing some research on Political Science Quarterly, it is a very reputable journal article as well. So because of all of those reasons, this third source will definitely be credible as well. So these last two sources are two things that you can use if you were to be writing an essay on that topic that we presented earlier. So that kind of concludes today's presentation. If y'all have any questions or concerns about anything that we discussed, feel free to ask a question in the chat, but thank you so much for coming out to the presentation.